one of the things that President Obama would constantly convey to us, one of his most common guideposts to us was to ask, what is the story we're trying to tell? Every speech is a story. You're taking the audience on a journey. There are characters, there's a setting, there's conflict, there's tension, there's resolution. You go and spend some time and look at all the elements of what makes a great story. They're all in the same elements that make a great speech.
This is Brand Story, a podcast featuring in-depth conversations with leaders, marketers, and brand storytellers about their professional journey and the impact they are making on the world around them. Welcome to the Brand Story podcast. I'm your host, Steve Gilman, and my guest today is Terence Szuplat. Terry is well known for being one of President Barack Obama's longest-serving speechwriters. From 2009 to 2017, Terry helped conceive and draft hundreds of speeches on global security, international economics, U.S. foreign and defense policy, and human rights. As a special assistant to the president and senior director of speechwriting at the National Security Council, he joined President Obama on visits to over 40 countries. During Obama's second term, Terry served as deputy director of White House speechwriting in the White House Speechwriting Office and assisted with State of the Union addresses, produced innovative content to reach new audiences via social media, and Terry is currently the founder of Global Voices, a strategic communications and speechwriting consultancy. Welcome, Terry. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to talk to you. Your career is just amazing. I've read that this whole thing started with an internship.
That's right. Like a lot of things do in Washington, D.C. I was a student at American University. I was interested in government, politics, rhetoric. I was doing a senior thesis on presidential rhetoric. My advisor called me up one day and said he heard that there was an opening in the White House speechwriting office for an intern.
Wow, good internship.
Yeah, I went down there and I was assigned to President Clinton's foreign policy speechwriters. And as an intern, you're doing research, you're doing lunch, you're getting coffee, but once in a while they let me take a crack at something. And they'd have to completely rewrite it because I really didn't know what I was doing. I had no proper training in speech writing or rhetoric. But through them, I started to learn how to write for the ear, how to write for presentation, as opposed to, say, writing an essay, which is a different skill set. But that's how it started. That's how I got the bug in me. And I just thought, what an incredible job, what an incredible opportunity to be able to help the President of the United States, tell America's story to the world, which is really what speechwriting communication is all about. In this case, the story you get to tell is the story of the United States and why other countries, other people should want to be our ally, be our partner on things that we all care about. So, yeah, I was 20 years old, senior in college, and I still have the copy of the president's schedule from when he went to Kyiv at the time, Ukraine, a newly independent and free Ukraine, that I helped write the remarks for his, nothing historic, but just remarks to U.S. Embassy staff. But it was the first time I got to do it, and just thought it'd be an incredible job to have one day.
That's amazing. Is that where your interest and specialty, if you want to call it that, in foreign policy started to really become your area of focus?
I think so. I've done a lot of different kinds of writing over the years, but as if there's one area that's interested me the most, or where I've spent most of my time, it's in foreign affairs, global security. And yeah, to being able to help President Clinton's speechwriters, in a small way, I think sparked that for me.
Yeah, and what was your very first speechwriting job, your first paid gig?
It came a few years later. I applied for and got a speechwriting job for the Secretary of Defense. And I always joke, I had never served in the military. I had never worked in the Pentagon. I had never, worked in any capacity in the military. But I was young, and they had an established office of very experienced writers. I think they were looking to bring in some kind of someone young that they could train up and teach their ways. And within a few years, they had all moved on to other opportunities, and I was suddenly the most senior person on the team, and became the chief speechwriter to the Secretary of Defense when I was about 25 years old or so.
Man, what an opportunity. And you were definitely at that age where you weren't so intimidated that you just leapt right in and started doing it,
Well, I was pretty intimidated. It was pretty Again,
I
never
bet.
having had any formal training in speech
Yeah.
writing or communications, and really, whether I was an intern at the White House or as a young speechwriter at the Pentagon, really, those were rough years. I was being completely rewritten a lot. That's what, at least that was my memory, and so I had to try to understand, well, what did I do that was wrong, and what was it that I needed to do better the next time. It really was learning by doing and trial by fire, and eventually got there. But it was a rough time. For a while, I thought I might not do it. I might leave. I just thought maybe I'm not cut out for this. But people were very patient with me. I had a lot of mentors who took the time to teach me, and eventually I got there. But it took a while.
Oh, I bet. Like that, I think that's how all good writers and great writers learn. I mean, it's so iterative and having people teach you and show you. I've had several writers on the podcast. And I had Ken Marcus, who's a copywriter that works for all the Geico ads with the Martin Agency. Very different kind of writing, but he said similar things where when he started out, it was everyone revising what he did and him learning. And I really think that's how great writers learn their craft in a lot of ways.
Right. It's very humbling.
I bet, especially on that stage. The stakes are a little high when you're writing for the Secretary of Defense. So you spent 8 years in the Obama administration, and working in the White House is notoriously demanding and exhausting. How did you make it through 8 years with your sanity and your health, sir?
Sure. Well, the first was, again, with a lot of support.
Yeah, I bet.
My wife and I have two children. They were pretty young at the time. She took up a lot of the work on the home front. Uh, the people I worked with, John Favreau, the chief speechwriter in the first term, Cody Keenan in the second term, Ben Rhodes, who's the chief foreign policy speechwriter throughout. Um, I had made it clear. I loved what I did. I absolutely loved it. I loved working there. I loved writing. The adrenaline rush never stopped, even at the end. Years 6, 7, 8, we retired, but I loved the experience of trying to help craft these moments for the president to connect with the audiences both in the room and around the world. The trips we took were, just huge adrenaline rush, and I loved doing it. So I never got tired of it. It was hard. It was frustrating at times, but between my wife at home and incredible colleagues at work, I was able to do it. And one thing I did do that I think, because I was the only speechwriter at the time who had children, had small children, I tried whenever I could to leave at a reasonable hour. And it's pretty common in the White House to stay there till, there's always more to do, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock on a regular basis. And I knew that if that were my life, I wouldn't be able to do it for very long. I wanted to do it as long as I could. I wanted to do it the whole time. And so 6:30, 7 o'clock, most nights, barring some sort of national, security crisis, I would try really hard to go home and have dinner with my family and help put my kids to bed, and then get back online and work late into the night. But I had the support of colleagues who would allow me to do that. It didn't happen all the time. There were a lot of things that came up. It just wasn't possible, but I was able to do it more often than not, and that made a huge difference for me and my family. And I couldn't have done it as long as I did it if I hadn't had some sort of arrangement like that, and tried hard to make it work.
That's amazing to hear. I'm really glad that that was the situation you're in because knowing enough about that world and being in DC and knowing other people who've worked in various administrations, the workload's very intense.
Not everyone can do it. I don't think that's as easy to do in the communications and the press shop, but with speech writing, if I was going to have to work 4 or 5 hours, it's me at it's you at a computer. So whether I did that from 7 to 7 to midnight, or 8 to 2, 10 to 2 in the morning, never missed a deadline, always got the work done. So I think so long as you hold up your end of the bargain, and I tried really hard to make it work, and I was able to stay until the end.
That's great. So I've heard that great speechwriters are basically translators of really complex ideas. Do you think that's true?
I do. I think we tried. Translators and simplifiers, maybe that's the same thing. We spend a lot of time reading the briefing materials that go to a principal like the president or the secretary of defense. We sit in on the meetings where policies are being developed and formalized in writing. But none of that is necessarily written for a general audience. And not being, I think one of the attributes that can make a speechwriter good at what they do is to not be a subject matter expert sometimes, because if we wanted to explain it to a general audience, I first had to explain it to myself. I had to understand it. And again, not being, I'm not a Russia expert. I'm not a Europe expert, but I would write this president's speeches on Europe and Russia. So what I had to do was listen to the experts and then try to distill it and make it more accessible first for myself and then for a general audience. And so, I think I think that's generally how I thought about it, is that we're going to simplify this. Speeches are not policy papers. They're not legal documents. They're not legal briefs. They're not essays. They're not books. They are the script that a leader uses to speak to and communicate with and connect with an audience. And that's a whole different series of skill sets.
It's a little like, we're in marketing and brand, and we're always talking about being audience centric and thinking about their point of view and what they'll understand, not necessarily what someone wants to put in front of them. And so I think there's a lot of storytelling techniques. Did you find when you're writing speeches, and you wrote some amazing ones, do you consciously think of storytelling techniques or story structure?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that President Obama would constantly convey to us, especially when we had these bigger speeches coming up and have to go up to the Oval Office and figure out what it is he wanted to say. One of his most common, guideposts to us was to ask, what is the story we're trying to tell? Every speech is a story. You're taking the audience on a journey. There are characters, there's a setting, there's conflict, there's tension, there's resolution, hopefully of some kind, there's challenge. Go and spend some time and look at all the elements of what makes a great story. They're all in the same elements that make a great speech. And so you have to think about it before you sit down and write. What is the story I'm trying to tell? Where do I start? What's the journey I'm going to take the audience on? Where are we going to end up? How do we get there? How do you keep the reader, of a book, the listener of a speech engaged throughout? So absolutely. And this speech is not only a story, but then of course the power of storytelling within speeches. Some of the most memorable moments that I think in President Obama's rhetoric is when he told stories of ordinary Americans, people who exemplified the issue, the story, the struggle that we're trying to serve. A veteran. This is how we connect with each other as human beings. They've done studies. Our oxytocin levels shoot up when we start hearing a story, and it activates all sorts of emotions of empathy and charity and compassion. And so, as a speechwriter, you're always it's the stories. It's not the statistics. Again, this is not a research paper. It's not a policy paper. If you're loading it up with lots of statistics, again, for a general audience, you're probably going to achieve what you want. But if you root it in, think of, again, both the speech itself as a story and then storytelling within it. And there's so many different ways to do that.
And it's about emotion. It's about reaching the emotional life of the audience, whether that's through a speech or any kind of story. It does help when you have a great orator too. And, so you were writing for what I think is probably the best orator we've had as a president. He's a natural storyteller and a gifted speaker. So did that make your job harder or easier at times?
Always made it harder. It always made it harder. So I'm going to mess this up, but at one point early in his presidency or during the first campaign, he said something to the effect of, I'm a better strategist than my strategists. I'm a better, communicator than my communications folks, and I'm a better speechwriter than my speechwriters. And it hurt a little bit, but it also was true. And he wrote the speech that catapulted him to national prominence was his speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention in Boston. He wrote that himself. He wrote so he was a speechwriter before he ever had speechwriters. And so, as a speechwriter, one of the things you're trying to do is, of course, not write it the way you think it should be said. You're writing it for someone else. And particularly with the president, you're trying to write as best you can what they would write if they only had the time to do it themselves. And so that's what I was always asking myself is, if he did have a few hours and could write this himself, what would he write? That's what I should be trying to do. The challenge is that he was a better speechwriter than his speechwriters. And so there were times, some pretty dark moments when I hit a wall, I had writer's block, I was frustrated, or I just had that, insecurity of, you're writing, no matter what you do, it's not going to be as good as what he could do. And at times that became crippling, and I had some real, dark experiences, but it generally made it harder.
I bet. Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult audience. And I'm sure it was a very collaborative process in ways, where you would write something and it would get changed by him, or you would go back and forth as well. But yeah, it's a high bar trying to write for someone that's already a gifted communicator.
Yeah, and again, he was a teacher in that, and when he did do significant structural changes, which as a writer I always found the most challenging. A line edit is easy. It's a different word, a different sentence, cross out, move this here. But when someone basically, you've written it in a way that makes sense to you. You've structured it in a way, A leads to B, leads to C. You've put it in a certain order. Certain examples are used to illustrate certain points. And then when someone comes back to you and said, I see this differently. I see this structure different. I see this example that you've used is actually, to me, more illustrative of a different point. And so I would, so when someone kind of deconstructs the speech and asks you to reassemble it, as he often did, it was one of the most challenging parts of speechwriting that I ever had. Because again, you've approached the whole thing a certain way. They're asking you to step back, look at it with a clean slate, a blank page, and reassemble it in a different way. That requires sort of a different series of mental steps, and that was hard. But again, every speaker is going to have, there's 100 different ways to write every speech, and every speaker comes at it differently. And so most of the time, I think we delivered. Sometimes he had a different take. And we had to, under very, very tight timelines, with the crowd in the theater, the music's going, they're cheering, he's waiting to go out, and you're moving paragraphs around. There's a few things more stressful than that.
That'll get your adrenaline going, won't it?
Sure did.
So you've worked on so many important speeches. Is there any one speech that you're the most proud of? I know that's it's like asking you to pick children. But is there anyone that just pops out to you as one of your favorites?
There is. At the end of the administration, someone asked all of us to pick a speech that we were most sort of proud of or connected to. And you can go online and Google, Obama speechwriters, pick their favorite speeches. And what's interesting is almost all of them are speeches that I think most people have never heard of. One or two are ones you've heard of. They're the big ones. But for the most part, the speeches that connect with all of us are ones where we had a real personal connection to in some way. And for me, that was, I was born in Boston. I grew up in Massachusetts. And so when the Boston Marathon was bombed and people were killed, I was able to help with the president's remarks at the memorial for that, which became a real tribute to the city and to the spirit of the city and the people, and sort of the right way to respond to fear and terror. And so to be able to work on that meant a great deal to me because, in that case, I was sort of trying to help my own home state and hometowns get through a really difficult moment. And so to be able to play a part in that and help a group of people that I care, just in the country, get through a really awful moment meant a lot to me just on a personal level.
I bet. Yeah, that was a beautiful speech. I watched that and found it to be an incredible speech. I was a huge fan and still am of of the speeches that President Obama gave because he was such a gifted speaker. And how important do you think having someone that's a really talented orator in office is to American leadership?
I mean, it's important. I mean, we've seen all sorts of examples of it. You know, I would say going out and reading a speech isn't that hard. I mean, we all see it. We politicians, CEOs, leaders of NGOs, people in our community, and we all know the difference between someone who's reading something and someone who's really inhabiting it and lifting it up. And so I think, I always tried to give my A+ work every single time. And I never wanted him to come back and say, did you not try? I wanted him to know I put our heart and soul to every single draft. And yet, no matter what we did, he could still find a way to lift it up higher, whether through his delivery or an ad lib. And yeah, or oratory, actually delivering a speech, is a whole different skill set than writing it or even just reading it. And you know the you know the effective use of a pause to let an idea sink in, or to let the crowd react to something, or to let them start to chuckle or start to cheer or start to process what you've said. These are all things that how to raise your voice at the end of a sentence, how to deliver something with a rhythm. Sometimes it's not always obvious from the written word on a page what those are, or the line you need to hit. With a lot of clients I work with, I underline things, or I put ellipses to force them to breathe. We never had to do that with him. He was just such a gifted orator, and so he was always able to lift it up and take it to a higher place. And that's a learned skill. I mean, a student once wrote to him and asked him the secrets of giving a great speech, and he wrote back. And one of the things he wrote back was practice, and that he said, I wasn't very good the first 50 times I did it. We only remember the first speech that most of us ever saw Barack Obama was 2004 Boston. But by then he had been at it for a while. We just hadn't seen it. But yeah, you got to practice. You have to get better at it. And we all know it. We know it when we hear it. We know the difference between someone. And as a speechwriter, again, that's one of the things you strive for. Is sometimes someone would come to me and say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I know you really worked hard on that." And he had lived a lot. I could tell he had lived a lot of it because he wasn't reading it. And I mean, that actually was a compliment, because he hadn't ad-libbed it at all. But the person in the audience felt like he had left the script, because they couldn't tell the difference between the prepared script and his natural voice. I mean, that's what you want. You want the script to be as close to their natural voice and rhythms and patterns as possible. Sometimes with other leaders you've heard, you can absolutely tell the difference between when they're speaking and when they're reading, which is, I think, kind of an indictment on both the speaker and the speech writing.
Yeah, you have to really be able to write for someone's performance style and their rhythms and their voice, and you and the whole speech writing team,
It's a script.
we're just amazing. Yeah, it is a script, and to have a great performer makes it a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think business leaders, I know you work with a lot of companies and internationally and nationally now, what do you think business leaders who speak to larger groups of employees, and investors have to learn from professional speechwriters? Because not all of them get someone like you to help them. What is it? What advice would you give?
When I'm working with clients sometimes, or doing workshops with people who write for CEOs, one of the things I hear is, my CEOs is so boring. We go to boring conferences, and frankly, the product we make isn't that exciting. And I don't see the opportunity for something that connects emotionally with an audience, or whether they're investors or clients or employees. And that always sort of breaks my heart, because I feel like, if obviously, if you think you're boring, if you think your boss is boring, I mean, obviously there's not going to be an opportunity to really connect on an emotional level. But I think people are missing opportunities to think bigger and beyond their product and their company. I mean, everything that every company, pretty much every company, you're doing something to help make somebody's life better, I hope, if you're working at a good company. And if you think a little bit more broadly about what you do and the impact you have on people's daily life, if you're making a product, some companies are very good at this. They understand the emotional connection they have. But, I tell people I've worked with a company that is an IT company. I've worked with them for years. I still don't quite know how the software works, but they've always recognized, and their CEO has always recognized, that they're not just in the business of software. They're in a larger business. They're about something bigger, and it's about making companies and organizations more transparent and open, and having relationships with their customers or their volunteers. And that's how they speak about their product. And that's why people want to go work for them. That's why they get to turn people away, because there's something bigger than just the product. And so I think sitting down, going through that thought process and thinking, can we tell, we talked about story, can we tell a bigger, better story about who we are, what we're doing, the impact we're having, and how it improves people's lives. Steve Jobs, talking about Apple, once said, look at a Nike commercial, right? Like, are they ever telling you about how great their sneakers are, or are they trying to connect with you on an emotional level about a lifestyle and a choice? And so I think more companies could do that. Not it's harder for some than others.
But I think everybody has a why, and I think we help companies with that too. Is like, if you feel like what you do is boring, it's probably not, and it's probably needed, and there's a reason that you're doing it. There's a reason the company started. I've always found that everyone has a story to tell, and if you just dig a little deeper.
Yeah, I often ask you, why did you start this company? Tell me, go back to the beginning. Why did you do this? Why did you do something else? And tell me that story again. And remember, companies drift from that, or as they get bigger, as they move into other areas. But having an origin story, remembering what that is, why you did it, that's what animates people. So I feel, yeah, I feel, and I'm sure there are a lot of CEOs out there who would love to give a better speech. They'd love to be, not just talking about the widget and the product that they make, and having a bigger purpose.
I think a lot of CEOs and a lot of leaders think they need to talk about the what all the time. Like, let's just talk about the what and the details and the benefits. And really what human beings want to hear about is the why and the emotion and the bigger, wider story than the how you're helping. It's like what you said earlier about, that's how human beings connect and learn. We all connect and learn through story. So I think, that's something that's one of the reasons I have this podcast. I love people's stories. So I just can't get enough. I've been diving deep into stories since I was a kid and directing plays in my front yard. So this is really fun talking to you today. So do you think, have you given any thought or think about how the shorter attention spans and sort of the TikTokification of media, does that make speechwriting more difficult today to hold people's attention?
I would think it does. I mean, most people don't have the appetite for a State of the Union length speech.
Yeah, right.
Or even a half-hour speech. There's people talk about kind of the golden rule of 18 to 20 minutes, which is probably about right. I mean, if you can't say it in 18 to 20 minutes, then you probably don't know what you're saying. And yeah, I mean, we'll see, right? We'll see another 10, 15, 20 years when this generation of kids who have been raised on TikTok and Instagram grow up, and do they have the stomach for even 15 to 20 minutes? And that's going to force a lot of it's maybe a different discussion, but I generally think that leaders, especially presidents, give too many speeches, and that speeches are too long. We would sit, again, because we understood that a speech is a story, and we worked for someone who saw it that way as well. We think, okay, this is a 20 to 30 minute story. I've got to build all the pieces and make sure they fit and lead in the right order to one another and it all holds together. And, the reality is that very few people actually will see that whole speech and experience that as the story that we envisioned. Most people are going to see a few words on the nightly news or a headline or a quote in the newspaper or, maybe a minute or two on social media. Didn't change how we wrote, but I think over time we all tried to be shorter, and I think going forward, I think leaders, especially politicians and presidents, are going to have to think about whether or not it makes sense to give these 30-40 minute speeches.
Yeah, or whether to try to deliver it in shorter chunks.
Yeah, and a president's time is precious. Why go out and do a 30-40 minute speech if the world is not going to consume a 30 to 40 minute speech? So, I mean, on one level, President Obama recognized this. He was, one of the. We were flying into Santiago, Chile, to give a speech. We had worked on the speech. He came back to Air Force One. He said, something to the effect of, this is a great, this is a good 6-page speech. It'd be a great 5-page speech, which was his nice way of saying, basically, remove about 20% of the speech. And the plane was landing and shaking, and we're coming to the airport, and we're just at that point, you're just, the machete's out. You're just there's no word cuts that are going to get you 20% off your speech. You're just taking out whole sections, and because shorter is better. I mean, he knew that, we knew that, but he really always pushes. So you think you're as short as you can be. Actually, you're not. So over time, he did that enough times that it was infuriating at the end and terrifying to have to do it. Over time, I internalized it, and okay, I think I'm done. Can I get this onto one less page?
Can I go back and get it even shorter?
But that's a useful exercise. I often, when in the workshops that I do, we end up ourselves. I've said, we're going to do a 500, 600 word speech. You're done. Oh no, wait, you're not done. Take 100 words off in the next 10 minutes. And you can always do it. You may not want to do it. You may have to let go of some things you like, but you can do it. And it's better that you do it when you have the time to do it right than to have the person you're working for have you do it in a final 5 minutes when it's going to be pretty ugly.
Yeah. You do a lot of training like that and a lot of keynote speaking. What do you think makes a great keynote? I've seen clips from a few of your keynotes, and I think you have so many fascinating stories and value to bring to people. What do you really try to go over with people who are potential writers or people who are trying to communicate better?
I try to do what we tell everyone to do, which is, give the speech that only you can give. I figure we've been invited because we have a unique experience. I want to bring the audiences into the White House, into the room, what it's like to be in the Oval Office, what it's like to be building a speech in the West Wing, what it's like to be there on Air Force One and going through those moments that I just mentioned, and just bringing it alive with real stories, things that actually happened to me, things that I lived through. Like I said, I've never taken a speechwriting course in my life. I've never even read a book about speechwriting. I'm thinking about writing one myself, and I'm torn because on one level, I would be curious to see what other people have written about this topic. But on the other hand, I don't want to be sort of influenced by what others. I want to bring my experience and my stories to bear.
I would read that book. You have a very unique story to tell. I'd love to hear it.
Again, not every lesson will be applicable to everybody, but I find that generally speaking, what we did in the White House for a president is pretty transferable to whether you're writing for a CEO, an executive, the head of an NGO, whether you have to speak to your school board tomorrow night, whether you have to, give a toast to your parents on their anniversary or someone's bar mitzvah. They're the basic elements of public speaking and storytelling transcend all those spaces. And I think, you want to hear how someone like Barack Obama did it. and how you might be able to do some of that yourself, I think could be very useful. So that's what I try to impart in the speeches and the workshops that I do, which is try to bring that experience alive for people.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and people get a lot out of it because it's very rarefied air. I mean, the stakes are high. The discipline and the work and the speed that you all had to work under, I think, definitely makes you elite speechwriters. I mean, I think people can learn an awful lot. So if you ever write that book, I'm there. I'll get the first copy.
There you go. It's easy to say I'll write a book.
Yeah, I know. It's super hard to do, isn't it?
If I can do it and maintain my sanity.
So you traveled to over 40 countries with the president. That is a lot of travel. And there's something that was always in the media, and I heard said that, as President Obama would speak internationally, he would apologize for America. And that I couldn't disagree with that more. But I'd love to hear your perspective on that, because I found that his style, he would always be transparent and empathic about his real experiences in America. And, he's a minority in America, so his experiences are going to be very real indeed. So I'm sure you've heard that a million times.
So first of all, I think it's important to remember who was saying that, who was making the criticism. And they were always political opponents. On the other side, they were trying to score political points. Okay. So that number one. Number two, so check the record. I tell people go online, search for it, find where he got up in front of a foreign audience and said, I want to apologize for what the United States did. The only thing that they can point to are times when he got up and spoke truthfully about our experience and our journey as a country, as a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society that at its founding was not a full democracy, and that has through many stages tried to broaden the promise of the United States to people. So when he would talk about slavery, he was not apologizing for the United States. He was standing up and sharing our experience as a nation that confronts its imperfections, confronts its contradictions, and tries to deal with them. And he was doing that for a very, very specific reason. He was doing that often in countries who have similar issues that maybe they're not confronting themselves, or maybe people are being thrown in jail for discussing them, or press are being stifled because they write about them, or people are being arrested because they march for them. And so what he was trying to show was show, not tell, that this is how strong, good countries behave. This is how you can become a stronger, more prosperous country, by dealing with things that are hard and difficult. And so he was using the experience of the United States as an example for others to learn from.
Yeah, and I always thought, I've listened to a lot of those speeches and read about this, and having a little bit of vulnerability and telling the truth to an audience and just sharing the real experience isn't weakness. It's actually strength, and being a bully is weakness. So I always respected that a great deal.
We have foreign leaders come and give speeches to joint sessions of Congress. Can you imagine if a foreign leader stood up there and lectured the United States on what it ought to do regarding race relations, or Americans would, across the political spectrum, would sort of be repulsed by that? Well, guess what? That's how it works everywhere around the world. And we have had examples of American presidents, wagging the finger in foreign countries, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so Barack Obama was very deliberately trying, to connect with these audiences, acknowledging that there is no perfect nation on the planet. We are very proud of our history in many ways, and we are also proud of how we've tried to overcome difficulties. And that was the context in which he shared all those stories. And again, as someone who made those trips, sat in the room, sat in the audience. I watched how foreign audiences responded to that. The people lobbing these criticisms weren't there, didn't see it. It worked. And it works for the same reason why when you're having a discussion with a family member, a neighbor, someone in your community, a business partner who you don't, um, you've got to have a little class. You've got to acknowledge that you're not perfect and you can learn, and that builds trust. It builds credibility, and it creates a space where you can do business together and work together. And that's really what all these trips were always about. Presidents don't make these trips to travel because they like to travel. Usually they love nothing more than go home and sleep in their own bed. They're there to do business, to do work, to get trade deals done, to forge agreements on security. And this was all part of that, building trust and credibility, not only with leaders, but with the people in those countries.
And I think trying to build rapport that way by talking about your strengths and your experience and maybe your weaknesses as a nation or a person when you're trying to like connect with an audience is brilliant. I mean, that's really the best way to go about it. And I think it's the opposite of sort of a us versus them mentality that's kind of gets superimposed on messages like that, like, oh, well, you should always be strong at all points. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right. That's right.
I think one of the things that I've noticed, of course, and, we won't dive deep into this, but since your all's time in the White House, certainly things have been interesting. And I think public discourse has gotten even more polarized and, conflict's been a little weaponized. Do you have any ideas or any thoughts on how we get back to a place where we're listening to each other a little bit better?
I think, one of the things that everybody who has a platform, whether they're a politician, a business leader, someone on social media, I think one thing we can, there's a lot to unpack here, but I think one easy thing that we could all do is to stop, to not be so quick to question other people's motives. Number one, because most of us don't know what the true motives of another person are. We don't know what's in their heart. We don't know what's in their head. We know what they say, and oftentimes that can be a window into their heart or their mind. But we really don't know what they are thinking. And when we all know from our own lives, when someone questions your motives, that immediately creates distance, and it makes it harder to have a rational, calm discussion. And so I think that's one. But it's hard. We're in an environment where the vast majority. To put it in the political realm, we're in a moment when, according to surveys, the vast majority of Democrats think that the vast majority of Republicans are racists, and the vast majority of Republicans think the vast majority of Democrats are socialists bent on destroying America. If that's the way that people are approaching dialogue and communication, there's not a whole lot of work to be done there, other than to try to destroy and beat down, frankly, your fellow American. So I think one of the things that's disturbs me, but that there's the center is shrinking. And I don't mean the political center, because I happen to be someone who I see myself on the left, but most people, it seems, most leaders are speaking only to their base, and because they think the way to win is to just turn out more people who already agree with you. And so there just doesn't seem to be as much effort anymore to persuade, to try to reach out, to try to understand where someone else might be coming from, to try to reach them, connect with them, and persuade them, and to try to bring them over. We can't just be two different ideological camps that think the other is the enemy. I mean, the country won't be able to survive that way. So I think from a rhetorical standpoint, I wish there was more effort for people to not demonize the other side so quickly, and to at least try to acknowledge that that there are, I'm not necessarily talking about the leaders here, but just that there are fellow citizens who are people of good faith and are trying, and that we passionately disagree on a lot of things, really important things, but perhaps our rhetoric can be a bit more respectful. Um, it's easy to say, but I'm sure I'm saying this and someone's watching and saying, well, here's 10 things Barack Obama said that really upset me and certainly was not inclusive. He did try. I think every leader who has a microphone probably has said things they wish that they would not say again. But I mean, there's too few people trying to do that, and the people who throw the bombs get all the attention. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it's a cycle where the rhetoric feeds the division feeds the rhetoric, and but at some point, someone has to stand up and say that I'm going to fight like hell on the issues, but I'm not going to demonize you.
Yeah, I'm hoping somehow the tide on that changes, because you're right. It's just a cycle, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you start talking in an echo chamber to your own audience, and you're not truly listening, and you're not truly trying to build any kind of consensus. So yeah, I'm hoping that's something in the national rhetoric that'll change. And so thank you for speaking to that. I think that was super interesting. So what's next for you in Global Voices? What are you working on now? And besides your book that I'll expect the first copy of, what's going on with you?
How to get started on that?
Yeah, I know. Now you have this one person really anxiously waiting.
So I do for clients the same thing I did for President Obama, which is, I try to make sure that I'm helping them tell the best story they can. Again, whether they're a CEO and the best story they can tell about their company, an NGO, the best story they can tell about why people ought to support them, or even individuals, advocates, why, helping them figure out what their voice is, what their story is, how they can contribute in a unique way to a debate or discussion. And everything we've talked about today, the process, the philosophy, it's what I bring to my work. And I work out of a home office, and I get to so it's very different than I have windows, which is very different than working in the basement of the West Wing. So life is good, and yeah, I've started working on a book that I try to distill a lot of these lessons into a way that's accessible for people, so people can apply them in their own lives, whether they're in business or philanthropy or just in their community. Because I think there are some basic lessons that they work whether you're the president of the United States or whether you're running for school board.
Yeah, well, I think that's amazing. And I'm so glad we connected, because I'm having such a great time talking to you. So I've got a couple of real quick questions to ask you before we wrap up. And so let me ask you this. If you hadn't been a speechwriter, what do you think you would have done?
Well, like a lot of young people who come to Washington, I thought I was going to be a lawyer for a while. I took the LSAT,
right?
Didn't do so well on it. So that my first stab at being a lawyer didn't. But I had visions of arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court, which I guess would have been another form of speech writing and speech giving. But the idea of using your words and your argument to bring about change. So I don't know if that would have been a very good one, but this worked out.
Well, it worked out pretty well. So what's a piece of advice that you've been given that really stuck with you?
I think, what we've talked about, which is so many of us, the way we're educated, we're taught to write essays a certain way with evidence and arguments and data and statistics, and that's how you make a point. When it comes to speech writing and communicating and a human being standing in front of other human beings and trying to connect with them on some level, it's not the statistics, it's the story. It's always the story. It's the story you're telling and the stories you tell in the speech. And, I've always known that. I know it based on a lot of the research that I've done for this book. I know it even more now, and I've started to learn the science behind persuasion, the neuroscience, the psychology, the reasons. I wish I knew more of that at the beginning of my career. I think I would have sometimes written speeches differently. When someone from the policy shop comes and says, hey, we really want this fact in there because we really think this is an important statistic. We put it in. And I thought there were times, maybe that'll convince somebody of something. Maybe that'll change somebody's mind. We know now from all sorts of studies that, statistics and numbers rarely change someone's mind. They rarely motivate someone. They either agree with it, and so you embrace it, or, confirmation bias, you don't want to believe it, so you ignore it. Whereas if you really want to move somebody, you have to, understand their, value system, their moral foundation, their moral framework, how to kind of root your arguments where they are, with storytelling, with framing. That was something that I've learned, a piece of advice that I've sort of wish I appreciated more when I was starting.
That's great. So I have 2 final questions for you. Do you have any must read or must listen, any book, podcast, something that you just would love if people read?
No.
That's my favorite answer I've ever gotten.
I actually, yeah, like I said, I've never read a speechwriting book, so I can't recommend one yet. What I would always do is, again, speeches are they're not meant to be read. They're not meant to be, read alone. They're meant to be heard. They're meant to be experienced. And so, I always tell people, if you have a favorite speech or a favorite speaker, or, go online, and just listen. When I was first starting out as a speechwriter for Barack Obama, I had to learn his voice. I had to learn his patterns and his cadence and his rhythms. And I would find a speech, play it, put my headphones on, and turn the screen off so I wouldn't get distracted by all the hand gestures and the audience, and I would just listen for all those things, the tone of his voice, where he paused, where he breathed. And so, that speeches are meant to be heard. And so, I would say more than anything, if you like Kennedy, go listen to some Kennedy speeches. Don't watch them. Turn the screen off. If you like Reagan, go listen to some of his speeches. That's how, listen to them the way they were meant to be experienced. And it'll make you a better, it'll make you a better writer. It'll make you a better speaker if you are a speaker. That's what I tell people.
That's great advice. I'm so glad I asked you that.
It's more fun, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's anytime you're doing something, it's always great to just listen to a ton of it and just absorb and find the rhythms. So last question. This has been a blast talking to you today. If you could give your younger self any advice, what would it be?
Remember, this is going to be hard. I think earlier I talked about how there were some moments when I was either an intern or in my first speechwriting job at the Pentagon in my early 20s where I got really close to quitting or wanting to quit. And it's a different form of writing. It's very unique, and it's unique to the person you're writing for. I've been lucky. For the most part, the people I've worked for, I think it's worked. We've clicked. But I've seen other speechwriters who, they've had a wonderful experience with one speaker. They got each other, they got the voice, they had the mind meld, and then they went to work for someone else, and they didn't have that. It was a very frustrating experience. So if you enjoy it, if you love it, if you get a rush out of it, if you get that adrenaline, if you like, as I do, going to the speech, seeing the audience react, seeing the speaker draw energy from the audience and vice versa, and watch that dynamic. If you enjoy that and helping create those experiences, stick with it. And there will be dark moments, but if you're enjoying it, it's probably because you're good at it on some level. And I would say that is tell myself, and I'm glad I didn't give up. I'm glad I didn't quit.
Yeah, me too. Well, it's been so great talking to someone who's such an incredibly accomplished storyteller. And I think a lot of the speeches you worked on and that you wrote are absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Want to hear more inspiring stories? Subscribe on your preferred podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, and share. It's the best way to support us. Thank you for listening to Brand Story.